Hello, this is a video about the changes that I've seen in the culture over the course of my lifetime. I've lived for more than half a century. I realize that many people have lived for longer than that in this world, but I suspect that most of the people watching this video have lived a shorter time than I have. That is to say, I suspect that most of you are younger than me, probably by a significant degree. I'm sure that's not true for everyone, but I bet it's true for most of you, probably the vast majority. So I thought that my own insights here, my own observations might be of interest for those who haven't seen as much of the scope of the change that's happened over the last half a century. Now, I don't remember my very early years. None of us remember like when we were 2 or 3 years old, or very few of us do. You know, our first memories are like, I guess, around 3 or 4, generally speaking. But I can say some general things about what I've seen the world, the observable world, my observable world, the world that has been in my purview, the changes that I've seen over the course of the last half a century. And if there were one, if I were to summarize it all with one word or in one simple phrase, I would say that things have become more corporate. I guess I'm going to use more than one word, but I'm just going to use various descriptors to talk about the change in a general way. Things have become more corporatized. Things have become more streamlined. Things have become more centralized. There's less and less privacy. There's greater and greater surveillance. There's greater and greater monitoring of one's thoughts, words, and deeds, regardless of who one is, even if you're somebody who's not particularly notable, by the standards of the world, who's not a famous person or a quote important person by the standards of the world, you're still your move is still every move is still being monitored to a much greater extent than when I was younger. And I remember this. Actually, there's a scene in the first Joker movie. I say the first because the second one is coming out soon. But there's a scene in that movie where Arthur Fleck grabs the record. He takes the record of his youth away from the clerk in the asylum, and runs away, runs down the corridor, and runs into the stairway. And I remembered thinking at the time, oh, there's going to be security cameras there. They're gonna see him with security cameras on the stairwell. And then I thought, no, this movie is set in 1980 or 1981, something like that. In a general sense, it's set in the early 80s, the very early 80s. And, even though Gotham City doesn't actually exist in our world, the entire feel of the movie, the aesthetic of the movie is very 1980, 1981 or thereabouts. The clothes, the fashions, the hairstyles, everything about the movie, the technology, it's all rather 1981. And I thought, in 1981, they didn't have security cameras in stairwells. I don't think they did. I don't remember. I mean, when I think back on that time, I can say it at least seems much more likely that they weren't monitoring everything. There weren't cameras everywhere yet. So when Arthur Fleck disappeared into the stairwell, he really disappeared. He wasn't being watched by anybody. It wasn't like, people could go after him and it wasn't like they checked the security cameras and to see where he was, because that kind of surveillance technology wasn't prevalent at all back then. And so that rang true. Now, is that good or bad? Well, it's I guess it depends on how you look at it. It's bad if you're wanting to catch somebody who's broken the law or done something egregiously wrong. Today there's all this technology at the disposal. There's cameras everywhere. Like, you watch a true crime show, and they're able to track down somebody who committed a murder by saying, here's a security camera where of this road where you see the car the car of the killer drive by, and that shows that he was going towards the site where he committed the crime. And people have cameras on their doorbells now, so you can see who comes to your door, and it can be used for protective purposes. There's no question about that. But I think in a larger sense, when there's cameras everywhere, we're far less free than we were before there were cameras everywhere. And in the world before there were cameras everywhere, you could just disappear into a stairwell and really disappear, and nobody would know that you were there, unless they saw you, run in there, but they wouldn't be able to pinpoint exactly where you were. And it's been a greater and greater trend. I mean, if you even tangentially follow trends, or see hear about various scandals that have been reported, and what you more and more find out is, yes, they're spying on you, or they at least have the ability to. They maybe they're not watching the camera at that particular time because what you're doing doesn't matter that much to them. But if it does, if they have some reason for caring about what you're doing and wanting to see where you are and what you're doing, they have a much better chance at finding you. And they have far fewer scruples about your privacy rights than you would hope. In fact, it seems to me they have no scruples. By they, I mean the watchers, the literal watchers of these cameras. Those who are given this the ability to look into all these aspects of our lives and our daily activities. It seems that the watchers have no real scruples. Maybe they never really did, even back in the day, back when I was young, before this surveillance state trend became so predominant. But back then they probably had the will to do it, but they didn't have the technology. Now they have the will and the technology. So I believe that the consequence of that is that we are less free significantly than we were. And yeah, there's a trade-off, because because bad guys who do bad things are it's easier to catch them now than it was in years past. Also, things like DNA, right? People just willfully give up, relinquish their DNA. They say they spit in a bag or whatever and send it to some company and that they believe has benign intentions, I guess. Otherwise, or they just don't think about it. But why would you want people to know your genetic footprint? Why would you willfully give that up just out of some curiosity about your genetics, I guess? Which I understand, it's interesting to know what your genetics supposedly are. But still, with things like DNA readings, where they can find, if they find fibers, they run DNA through a database. They are only supposed to have the DNA of a certain group of people who are criminals. But I bet you they have a much more extensive collection of DNA than that. I bet you anything that they do. So I think the overall upshot of this trend is less liberty. And maybe you could say it's more. We are. Maybe you could look on the bright side, if you want, and say, well, we also have more security now. Yes, you have more security if you trust. If you trust that the people who are watching you aren't the criminals. If you trust that the people who are doing the watching are interested in protecting you, and they're not using their technology in in ways that are inappropriate. In essence, not using it to do to further their own criminal intentions. And I think the more you get to know about power, the less you want to give powerful people the means to know things about you. Maybe to a certain extent you just can't help it. Maybe to a certain extent it's already out there. They're gonna they have ways of finding you out. I'm sure that's true, but don't make it easier for them, right? Why just why not? Why just offer it up on a silver plate to them? Why not make them work for it at least? So that's one change that I've seen that I think is significant. And I think that there's also I said before, I talked about things becoming generally more streamlined and more corporatized and more centralized. And I know that not everybody likes professional sports, and if you don't, that's fine. I'm sort of a casual fan of of professional baseball, professional football, to a lesser extent basketball. So I do follow sports news, and it is of a certain degree of interest to me. So I'm going to talk about how Major League Baseball looked different when I was a kid. Like in the late 70s and early 80s and mid 80s, it looked different. If you watch a game from 1982. Let's stick with 1981 because let's just to be consistent with the setting of Joker a moment ago. So this particular juncture of the past, the early 1980s. You watch a baseball game from back then, and in some ways, you might be appalled aesthetically if aesthetics are mean something to you, because the stadiums that Major League Baseball teams played in were ugly in the early 1980s. They had, the idea, the structures that were built for baseball teams, the trend in stadiums in the 60s and 70s was more about function and less about aesthetics. And so what you had were a lot of baseball stadiums where it was just totally in the round. Like I'll just talk about what I can remember. I grew up in Metro Atlanta, so I went to Atlanta Fulton County Stadium to watch the Atlanta Braves, and that stadium has a lot of doesn't exist anymore, but it has a great sentimental meaning to me. But I also am aware that it was not an aesthetically pleasing site. Again, the entire field just enclosed by in a perfect, like with rows of seats going up and up and up, and it's all symmetrical all the way around. So it's basically, if I were an architect, I'd know better how to describe it. But think of a donut, and if looked at from above, it's like a donut. The stands are the donut, except it's graduated, seats from the from the more field level seats to the middle seats to the upper level seats, and it's just the same. It's symmetrical all around the entire stadium. So it's not like you see lately. But anyway, let me continue with talking about what it was like then before talking about how it changed. And so so you had these stadiums that were not inspiring places, to watch baseball games. It was whatever was in the water at that time. The idea was, let's just make some functional place to be able to house, to bring in as many people to watch the game as possible. But let's not worry so much about aesthetics. Or maybe the aesthetic was brutalism. I don't know. I've talked before about the brutalist aesthetic, and my dislike of it. I don't know how anybody can like something that is brutalist. I mean, the very name. How can you like to be brutalized? Unless you're a masochist. But, you don't want to have your senses brutalized. You don't want to have your sense of aesthetics brutalized. But that's basically what brutalism is all about. So not only were, and I'm talking about professional sports because this is an example. There are other examples of the same trend in society in the early 80s. Things were more run down, even on like the professional level. You watch a baseball game from back then, and sometimes you'll see them playing on artificial turf, or what was called AstroTurf at the time. AstroTurf looks awful. It looks terrible. It doesn't look like grass at all. It's I don't even know how to describe it. It's sort of like if you maybe putt-putt courses are still like this. if you go to a miniature golf course, the kind of green, quote unquote green, that they would have there, where it was like just a artificial, like pseudo grass, but it wasn't anything like grass at all. It wasn't. It truly wasn't. And it didn't even look like it. So you had these stadiums that had this gaudy pseudo grass. Some of them were, there were domed stadiums for baseball were more common back then. Now I think there's only one major league stadium that's a dome all the time, and without a retractable roof. I think that's the Tampa Bay Stadium, if I'm not mistaken. There might be other exceptions to that rule, but I'm not sure. But it's generally thought you don't want to play indoors. That's just not. Baseball is like an outdoor game. You want to have a feeling of the outdoors. When it rains, then maybe if you have a retractable roof, then you close the roof. But you still want to give people like a glass, so that they'll be able to see, so that the light will filter in, natural light will filter in. It's not as important in other sports for there to be this outdoor feel, but baseball is supposed to be an outdoor game, and so you had these baseball parks. Some of them, it was like, a lot of them were in domed stadiums, which also were in the round, just like the stadium I talked about, like the Houston Astrodome, and other such structures. The grass doesn't look like grass. The stands are just completely functional, as opposed to the structure of the stadium being made in such a way with a certain aesthetic in mind, the reinforcement of a certain aesthetic, a baseball aesthetic, let's say. Instead it's just, here's enough room for the baseball field, and here is as many seats we can put in, so we can get as many paying customers and make the most profit as we can, for the game. 60,000 or so people that you can bring in to the stadium. And often even on fields that were grass, you would watch them play on grass, on turf that was really poorly, that was not kept up well. I mean, it's amazing if you watch a game from 1981, 1982, and often you'll see, lots of little splotches and divots and things like, that you would think that the makers of this stadium, or the ones who were paid to upkeep the grass, to make sure that it's being. Sorry, I'm getting a little warm. Who are paid to take care of the grass on the infield, and the outfield, and make sure that it looks good. There was less of it seemed like people cared less about that, or maybe there was just not as much they could do to make it look good. So, and since then, going into the 90s and beyond, there were a ton of franchises that rebuilt their stadiums, and the new stadiums were much more in line with the notion of aesthetics. It wasn't the cookie cutter stadiums anymore. In Atlanta, they built Turner Field in the 90s. which instead of being completely symmetrical and having, and looking like a donut from an aerial view, now it's asymmetrical in that there's stands here, like in the infield, but then in the outfield it's a little bit, there's room to see the jumbotron screen, and there's also like a nice looking area of an airy kind of area that has more that's more pleasant to look at. So so there was this, and I think that this trend is good in some ways, but it also denotes something that I think is not so good, and that is, how do I put this? It's hard. It's kind of hard to describe, but the feeling of being at a baseball game in 1981 is a professional baseball game, Major League Baseball game. And this is symptomatic of, I think, I'm using this as an example because it's symptomatic of a greater trend, of a trend that we see taking place in other places as well. Well, if you went to a game in 1981, there would be, the stadium announcer would announce who's coming to play. He would say he would read out the lineup, and then he would, when each batter came up, he would say the name of the batter, and then between innings, there would be maybe an announcement or two, but there wasn't this constant barrage like there came to be. There wasn't this cacophony of, oh, here's a splashy commercial for you to watch with the volume turned way up, and here's, it's like today when you go pull up to a gas station, you have to, in so many gas stations now, it's like, oh well, if you're gonna pump in your gas, you gotta watch this video. I don't want to watch it. I just want to sit here in silence pumping my gas. Well, you don't have that option. If you're at a baseball game, you could have a conversation with whoever you went to the game with between innings, but without having to shout above all the, and then, like, they weren't trying to get you to have fun all the time. Like, it wasn't like being on a cruise ship where they're saying, hey everybody, let's do something fun now, and come on, have fun, watch this thing where the baseball goes in three baseballs go in three different compartments, and or the baseball, we show the baseball being covered by three different hats, and it goes all over the place, and then you're supposed to follow along and say where it ended up in the end, and like all these things that are supposed to grab your attention and make sure your ballpark experience is optimal. They left you alone more. It was really, that's the other side of it. When things were uglier and less streamlined, and more of a, more geared towards function than aesthetics, that was bad in some ways. But the good part about it was they didn't try to make, a baseball game into the fun of an amusement park. It was like you went to the game and they left you alone more. Maybe they would play the organ, entertain you with some, something on the on the organ, or maybe they would try to get a clapping rally started, or um, you know, uh, or they would just play some old song, some some tune on the organ, um, which would be less. It would more be something that you could just have in the background, and you'd be able to chat, and you'd be able to just take it in at your own pace, and you were left alone more. But just like with the security state and its uh, the momentum towards greater and greater surveillance, now there's this trend toward greater and greater getting in your face, and like, trying to get you to have fun, and woo woo psh, stuff going on, and loud noises and colorful splashy graphics, and it's like you can't get away from it. You have to just become part of this amusement park experience, and it couldn't just be a game that you were watching, and you couldn't just like watch the game and then cheer when that you're when things are going well, or cheer when it's important for your team to make a big out, or to get a big hit, or something like that. um it's like they're just all over you. And I think if you're somebody who has been to professional sports, this probably even extends to college sports, I would imagine. I'm less aware of college sports. Um, it's much more contrived now, but things have advanced, and a sign of that advancement is we know that, like, sort of, you can see these technocrats, or whoever they are, these elites, saying, okay, we had them in these cookie cutter structures in the 80s, uh, and but we didn't really know what to do with them. But then we saw that those cookie cutter structures didn't really bring out the optimal experience for them, and so we didn't know really how to overwhelm them with bread and circuses. So now we're going to take them to a place that's much nicer to look at, but it's also much more. I've used the word corporatized. Things are just so much more corporatized. The latest ballpark in Atlanta, they abandoned Turner Field eventually, and they went to the suburbs. True to Truist Park. Of course, now almost every field is named after some corporation, uh, and I mean, that's very rollerball, like the let's stand for our corporate anthem, if y'all know that movie. Yeah, things are much more corporatized, and the result of that is they look nicer. It's like a gentrification. When a neighborhood gets gentrified, before it's gentrified, it kind of looks like a slum, maybe, or it's not that well kept. And maybe some people would think that's depressing. But on the other hand, uh, when you're in a slum, you can more keep to yourself. I'm not talking about a slum with tons of urban blight and crime and stuff. I'm just saying, if it's a kind of rundown area, then uh, it's it's less. There's less attention paid to uh, giving you this kind of experience to manipulate you, and to get into your mind with pretty pictures, and get you to become the kind of citizen they want you to become, where you'll own nothing and be happy, and so forth. Um, so there was much more room to just relax and take things at your own pace, and take in the game the way you want to take in the game. If you're at a stadium, they weren't screaming in your ear all the time or trying to get you to have fun all the time. And while the stadiums are better looking now, and I think that is a good thing, because I'm aware of the power of aesthetics, the use of aesthetics. There are times in which I think to myself, I kind of miss when this was crap. This place looked crappier, and this was more run down, because it was more that showed us that people were being left to themselves. If people are left to themselves, some people are gonna, let's just say in a neighborhood, some people are going to keep their house spick and span, and they're going to mow their lawn every week, and it's going to look really nice. But somebody else might just let the weeds grow, and I don't know, let the cobwebs form in the house, and not do a spectacular job of upkeep. And it's good to, don't get me wrong, it's good to clean your room, bucko. but I'm just saying, um, when you live in a world where you know where um, where you're left to your own devices, and where we're having this particular uh, trying to think of how to describe this. When you're left to your own devices more, it means greater freedom. And the thing about greater freedom or greater liberty is that some people are going to use that greater liberty to live the way they want to live, and be slovenly, or be at least be less spick and span, and so when things are more dilapidated, when things are more uh, going to seed, when things are somewhat ruinous, or not well kept up, that's a sign of freedom. That's a sign that you're being left alone. And some people don't need it. Some people don't value it as much. I have a lot of admiration for people who pick up pick up stuff off the floor, and make their beds every day, and just do a good job of keeping things spick and span. I'm not like that at all. I'm not bragging about it. I'm not saying that makes me good. It it's not that it's a virtue. It's just more my inclination, and I think that you allow for slovenliness, you allow for ugliness, um, and you give people more space. That was the thing. I think we all felt like we had more space to think what we wanted to think, and to say what we wanted to say. And if you said something that other people didn't like, it didn't become uh, it didn't become this drama of, oh, he said this. How dare he say this? He needs to apologize for having said this. I think cancel culture, um, which again did not exist really in any significant form before the 90s. Uh, but so if you found out that somebody harbored a point of view that you find contemptuous or contemptible, and or somebody used a word, used a slur that you didn't like, and so forth and so on, you could say, I don't like that person. That person seems like a really unpleasant person to me. I'm going to avoid him. and that was great. You could avoid him, but now the whole tendency to try to find out who said that forbidden word, and then do everything you can to ground him into dust because because of his contemptible use of that terrible word, or whatever it is that you don't like about him. Again, as we're getting more corporate, as we're getting more streamlined, as we're getting more centralized, we're seeing almost in every space, you know, in every facet of our lives, there is far less liberty than there used to be, and things are far more controlled than they used to be. I don't think we're living at a time that allows for eccentricity. I don't think we're living in a time where people who are a little unusual. I think people who are a little unusual, the worst is assumed about them. I saw this video the other day from I'm not going to say her name. If you know her, you maybe have seen this video, but there are some women on YouTube who are like, make a big deal about being pro-man and standing up for men and giving men compliments, and I don't know, just instead of saying you men are all assholes, and like is more and more the trend in the culture. There are women out there who are bucking that trend, who are intentionally going against it and trying to say nice things about men, or talk about things that they like about men, or helping men navigate their way into relationships with a woman who's worthwhile, and so forth. But this one girl who has the site was talking about how she was she was walking somewhere and she saw some guy who looked really slovenly, and she felt ill at ease, thinking he was going to do something to her. And then she saw some other guy who was well put together and fit and well dressed and better looking, and she thought to herself, well, now I don't know. Now I'm not so uncomfortable, because he'll protect me from that slovenly man who probably wants to rape me or something. She doesn't say that, but the presuppositions of all of that are, again, that if you're not beautiful, if you're not well kept, then you're a man. That's a crucial thing. If you're a man, if you're a woman and you're fat and ugly, then you're wonderful, and you must be affirmed no matter what. But but if you're a man, and you might not be the fittest, and you're dressed in a slovenly way, you're it's like there's more of a tendency to be contemptuous of you. And she was just being honest. I don't blame her for saying what she said. And she was sort of saying this to say, well, women do judge you about how you look, so get in shape, and use that as an inspiration to get in better shape, and dress better, and improve yourself, and all that. So anyway, that's like a symptom of this greater trend. Whereas in the past, it would have been more like, oh, well, that guy's slovenly. Okay, that's just who he is. Whatever. Today, it's like, oh, well, he needs to change. Even if it's not like a cancel culture thing totally, If it's not, oh, he said this word that we don't like, so we've just got to ground him into powder and make his life miserable and take away everything from him. Take away his bank account or take away his job. Make it so that his wife leaves him, whatever. Even if it's not that, it is still, oh, he's not so great looking, and he's not so well dressed. So let's we're going to hyper focus upon his flaws. And I mean, there's a time you can just be left alone and be ugly and be whatever you are, be whatever you've chosen to be. And people will just let you be. But now it's again, you have a harder time getting away from the prying eyes of the surveillance state in its many forms, many and varied forms. And so we come to 2024, the year that this video is being recorded. We come to the 2020s, and I don't think anybody in the 2020s, I haven't heard that many people say, oh, this is such a great time. I'm so glad to be alive right now. My own kids have said things to me like, I wish I could grow up in the 80s and 90s. It would have been so cool. They said that to me. Unprompted. And I didn't, having grown up in the 80s and lived in the 90s, at the time I wasn't thinking, oh, it's going to get so much worse. I should probably enjoy the way things are now, because in the future, by the 2020s, things are going to just be so shitty. In spite of, things looking nicer in some ways, like I said, that's a symptom of the greater corporatization of everything. The corporatization also of politics, the corporatization of feminism, the corporatization of gay rights or gay activism, all the trendy sorts of left-wing activisms getting co-opted by the corporations. That's just a sign. That's just a sign and a symbol, a part and a parcel of this trend. You can't even have your marginal little I don't know, little interests or things that you bang on about, like oh, what's her name, the girl in I Shot Andy Warhol, who was writing her feminist manifesto. This is about the Society for Cutting Up Men, SCUM, and she was just this weirdo, and but but people like that now, her views now would get co-opted by Chevrolet, would get co-opted by AT&T, and so you have the co-opting of the left. That's what's happened also in recent years, and it's all part of the same trend. It's all going in the same direction, towards greater tyranny, greater control, greater centralization. And so I think I'll just humbly say this at the end of this long video. I think what we need to do is find ways to decentralize, find ways on our own to, create little pockets of our own space where we can do our own thing. Because I think we need to roll back centralization one way or another. And maybe we can, just find a way to do it without it coming to blows, but maybe not. We'll see. I think it's something worth fighting for. I'll just end my video there.